Song because the other song is copyrighted. La 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 la. Oh look, here comes Dog Cat Fox.
Hi, Sky.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Sunday stream. The stream I do on Sundays because Sunday is the day to stream on Sundays. Hope you're all doing well on this beautiful Sunday morning. How many more times can I say Sunday? Probably several more. So here we are. Hope you've had a good week so far, because it's over with now. You don't have much time left. You're going to make it a good week. You got a few hours. But otherwise, so I came across a very familiar name yesterday as I was deciding what I was going to do for today's show, and that's Deanna Van Buren. Now, who's Deanna Van Buren? Well, I have a lot to thank Miss Van Buren for. She was, as far as I can recall, one of my very first, if not my first, foray into the subject of restorative justice on this channel. Way back in the olden days of, 2017, 2018, something like that. I came across her TEDx talk discussing a world without prisons. Yes, it was my first real examination of the idea of abolishing prisons, of sort of therapeutic safe spaces for rehabilitation rather than incarceration, and a whole bunch of other concepts about restorative justice that at the time I only had the barest understanding of. And not only that, but her delivery, her enthusiasm, her idealism, let's say, really stuck with me. And also several of the questions, inherent problems, and I don't know. Some of the aspects of restorative justice, insofar as eliminating prisons, eliminating police, just have some inherent pitfalls that almost never get addressed, and certainly were not addressed as far as I was concerned in her original presentation. Now, a link to that TEDXcellence is in the description below if you want to have a refresher course. For those of you watching in the future, want to have some idea of where we're coming from before we get into this. Because as far as I can recall, this is the first time I've come across and or checked in on Miss Van Buren since that TEDx. So I'm curious to find out what she might have to say about her project that she was in the process of getting started all those years ago, which I'm pretty sure never came to fruition, or if it did, to a very lesser degree than she had planned. But before I get into all that or anything else, who's joining me on this beautiful Sunday morning? Tier Alexander, Noah Sencio, Seftus Wolf, Kiefer Dam, Brett Ide, Ryan R. Who else is here? Taku for you. Let's see who else. Bridget, Jaeger Pony, Simon Willikins, Dixie Rose 63. Good morning, Scribelight. I finally caught one live. What did you catch? A catfish? A tiger by the tail? I don't know. Ex-Bubba Hotep, Ebony Williams. Good morning to you all. Seftus Wolf, if I didn't already say good morning. And Tia Fleorix, or TFAO Prescription. Renovatio, Emperor W.R. Costin, good morning. Good morning to you. Good morning to you. Yeah, so now a couple of notes before we get into this. The entire presentation runs something like an hour and a half, so I don't think we'll get to it all today, and I will decide if I'll do a part two, though I may have to, because despite the order of celebrity guests listed, as far as I can tell, Deanna Van Buren does not make a substantive irate bear appearance until the end or the last section of the whole thing. So I might have to do a part two just so I can find out from her what's been going on. But she has a whole bunch of friends joining her ahead of time. I did have to cut out about 10 minutes of preamble of this presentation because it was just a musical interlude as they were getting themselves ready, I guess. So there wasn't anything to see there. And I also cut out a land acknowledgement. Although as far as land acknowledgements go, it was one of the weaker ones I'd ever heard. It sounded more like a tourist guide plug than anything. Either way, I was able to cut out about 12, 13 minutes out of this that didn't need to be there. But with all that as preamble, let's talk about restorative justice and the design of intentional physical spaces. Because when you design a space, it's not already inherently intentional, I guess. Our host is, because he says his name very quickly, but his host's name is Tarek Massarini, if I'm saying that correctly. Anyway, so let's find out about justice through safe spaces, I think.
My name is Tarek Massarini, visiting professor at the Center for Justice and Peacebuilding at Eastern Mennonite University, and your moderator for this month's Zare Institute webinar on restorative justice and the design of intentional physical space.
Can you have an unintentional design of physical space? Like I suppose if you had like multiple elements of design on a dartboard and just kind of threw them over your shoulder, maybe, but all the same.
We spend about 85% of our lives in built structures, in a built environment.
Yes, we seek shelter from the cold. It's true. So,
this is going to be the topic we explore as it connects to restorative justice today. I would like to begin by reading from you your thoughts on what physical space means to you.
What physical space means to me? It sounds a bit, I don't know, esoteric. I don't know. What does reality mean to me, I guess? Or are you talking about like the spaces we inhabit? Four walls and a roof? I don't know.
So you will see a prompt posted to the screen, asking you for the key thing you need in a space if you are preparing to have a difficult conversation.
A difficult conversation? Oh boy, what do I need in my space for a difficult conversation? Beanbags. How about beanbags? Or Jack Daniels and Dr. Pepper. Because if I'm going to have a difficult conversation, I want to at least somewhat enjoy myself in the process. How about that?
Please respond to that prompt using the comments feature.
Okay.
So now I'd like to introduce very quickly our speakers for today. So our first speaker, and this is not actually in the speaking order, but is Deanna Van Buren, who's co-founder and executive director of the Design Justice plus Design Spaces. And you can find these bios on the Zare Institute website if you want to read them fully through.
So if I want to.
We're excited to have Deanna. Barb Taves will be joining us as well, Associate Professor of Criminal Justice at University of Washington, Tacoma. We'll have Cynthia Hammond. This is, I'm sorry, I didn't fail to mention Dr. Cynthia Hammond as well as Dr. Taves. And
yeah, don't leave out the doctor. We learned from Jill Biden that you can't say her name without the doctor in front because she's a doctor of something. Just not like a medical doctor or anything that's actually useful in life. But let me go back a little bit. We're at 143. I want to see Deanna Van Buren's bio. She is the co-founder and executive director of Designing Justice and Designing Spaces, which is an architecture and real estate nonprofit working to end mass incarceration through place-based solutions. DJDS builds infrastructure that address its root causes. What root causes? Okay. Poverty, racism, unequal access to resources, and the criminal justice system itself. Okay. She has been profiled by the New York Times, and her TED Talk, was it a TED Talk? I thought it was a TEDx. Was it an actual TED Talk? Maybe it was an official TED Talk. It's been a long time. On what a world without prisons could look like has been viewed more than 1 million times. Yes, and my video on her has been viewed I think like 900 times, so I'm almost there. Van Buren received her MA from Columbia University and is an alumna of the Loeb Fellowship at Harvard's Graduate School of Design. Yeah, she's actually a real architect. That's something that keep in mind, that she actually has a degree in what she's talking about, unlike a lot of the TEDx speakers that I might profile in other situations. Anyway, backing up just a smidge. Yeah, there we go.
Dr. Van Buren is an artist and professor of art history at Concordia University.
Okay. Wait, art history? Okay, so we have a criminal justice professor, an art history professor, I'll just say, an architect, and...
we have Greg Labrosse, who is a PhD candidate in humanities at Concordia University as well.
So he doesn't actually have a PhD? Or how does that work?
Well,
in humanities.
Okay. Dr. Ipek Torelli, an associate professor and research chair at the McGill University in Montreal.
Of what? Her research interests include low-income housing and participatory design, civil protest and urban design, and campus landscapes and race. That's an eclectic set of fields there. Okay.
Quebec. So without further ado, we're going to go to our guests here, starting first with Cynthia.
Okay.
And then moving on to Greg. Cynthia, take it away.
Okay. Thank you so much, Tarek. And patience, if you can hear me, this would be the time for my slides to come on screen, if that's possible. While we're waiting for that to happen, I'd like to begin by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the unceded Indigenous lands of the Ganyenga Haga Nation.
Oh.
And that Jojaga, or Montreal, has long been a gathering place for many First Nations.
Yeah, that was kind of what the moderator said at the beginning of his deal. Just kind of gave a profile of where he lives. Okay. And one of their viewers is putting up the word comfort, I think, is what they need to have a difficult conversation. So you need a space that is comfortable to have a difficult conversation. Okay.
Such a pleasure to be participating in this webinar today. I'm very honored to be in the same virtual space as Deanna and Barb, who you'll hear from later.
Okay. Transparency and a willingness of all parties involved to listen, to understand, not to react/respond. Yeah, so sit still and listen to my lecture of you. I will tell you when you can respond in this difficult conversation.
And I would like to, just looking at the interface here, I'd like to start by acknowledging the work of Dr. Luis Sotelo Castro, who is my colleague and collaborator at Concordia University.
I really wonder, just an aside, obviously I recognize Dr. Van Buren's name, but given how many of these kinds of things I've looked at over the years, I can't help but wonder if there's other people on the panel that I have seen before or listened to that I just don't remember.
Louis, who I believe is in the audience today, is a professor in the Department of Theater at Concordia and has been doing amazing work in oral history performance and what he calls acts of listening.
Ooh.
Listening, of course, being central to the work of both restorative and transitional justice.
Yes.
So Louis has been leading major interdisciplinary dialogues on listening in post-conflict societies, especially through what I think of as very groundbreaking interdisciplinary work, community engaged work at his research lab called the Acts of Listening Lab, which is located in Concordia University's Center for Oral History and Digital Storytelling. So a few years ago, Louis was giving a talk on precisely this work, listening in the context of a post-conflict society.
A post-conflict society? Okay, there's some terms being thrown around here that I'm not familiar with. What is a post-conflict society? How do you achieve a post-conflict society? Is that like the Star Trek The Next Generation Federation, where they've done away with all war and all poverty and everything else? And don't we need conflict? Without two rocks rubbing together, you don't get sparks. So don't you need occasionally a little friction to get things moving?
And he explained that very few formal restorative and transitional justice processes take place in purpose-designed spaces.
Now they're called prisons or therapist's office, or I suppose like, those sort of mental retreat places, where it's all wind chimes and wood decks and things.
And this was very mobilizing for me. I had not known anything about this before, but through my research, I discovered, for example, that during the collection of truth and reconciliation testimonials in Canada, these had mostly been gathered in kind of borrowed spaces like church basements and schools that were empty during the summer.
So what, they were supposed to build brand new buildings for this one thing? Okay. Photo caption. Micmac, if I'm saying that correctly, girls in sewing class at the Roman Catholic run Shubenacadie Indian residential school in Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia. Okay.
But exactly this kind of space would have very profoundly negative associations for many Indigenous individuals. And I'm showing you an image on the screen taken from a residential school in Canada.
How old is that picture?
So even just stepping into such a space.
I mean, look at that sewing machine there up at the front. How long ago did this occur?
Like this, for the purposes of giving one's testimony about what one had lived through as an Indigenous person, could be, in fact, re-traumatizing. And so it became clear to me that space was incredibly important to alternative justice practices, to the extent that it could even be detrimental to an otherwise well-intentioned process. So I began to learn about the astonishing work, of architects like Diana Van Buren, and to feel strongly that such work is at the cutting edge of socially engaged design practice.
Socially engaged design practice, cutting edge. Okay. I can't wait to hear some success stories, right?
And all this led me to apply for federal funding in 2019.
You want tax money. Okay. You want tax money. Okay. Thank you, X-Bubba Hotep, if it'll come up here on StreamYard, because there's always a little delay. Thank you, X-Bubba Hotep. I cannot tell you how many times listening to these things I internally scream, please say something that isn't a long list of buzzwords and nonsense, but I'm sure you understand more than most. It's true. It's true. The depth of my patience before we get to something meaningful is probably stronger than your average bear, but all the same, I still want them to get to the point. All the fluffy, flowery language and all the self-congratulatory stuff and yada, yada, yada. It's like, okay, whatever. I'm here to learn something, or at least listen to what you have to say on the subject, not just listen or watch you pat yourself on the back over and over again, right? And say something that makes some sense. But, so anyway, thank you, X-Bubba Hotep. Maybe we'll get there eventually.
Canadian funding to learn more about the spaces in which restorative and transitional justice take place.
So you asked for taxpayer money so you could learn about the spaces in which restorative and transitional justice take place. You need taxpayer money in order for you to find that out. Okay.
So in addition to Louis, you see here our research team comprised of Dr. Pecoraro, who you'll hear from later, Marcela Torres Molano, who unfortunately can't be here today, Greg, who you'll hear from later, and Vanessa Sikat, who also unfortunately cannot be here today, but amazing research team. And what we have been working to produce over the last 2 years is this website.
You took taxpayer money and spent 2 years to make a website that looks like something I could build in The Sims in about 5 minutes. Okay.
It is live, and it's actually part of a larger website that is organized by Luis Sotelo Castro called the Letitia Listening Acts, and I'm putting links in the private chat. I don't seem actually, Tarek, to be able to put links in the comments, but maybe you could copy them and share them with the guests. So I'm giving a link to both the website that you see pictured on the screen and the larger website around listening and conflict that this is part of.
Mm-hmm.
So our central research question for the project was, how does space affect the processes and experience of restorative and transitional justice?
Okay, I want to hear that one more time, just because I want to understand what it is that we're asking.
Which question for the project was, how does space affect the processes and experience of restorative and transitional justice?
How does space affect the processes? I don't know. You want to have a calming. You see, when I think of a restorative justice space, after everything that I've learned, I just think of your average to high-end counselor's office, right? Where you go to see your counselor, your therapist, whatever. It's a comfy space. It's quiet. There's not a whole lot of distractions. The couches are comfortable. It's very laid back, that kind of thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. I understand something about the psychological effects of space on a person. I have watched many an interrogation video. I have had pointed out to me over and over again about where you position someone in the room and how everything else in the room is positioned in relation to them to try to instill a certain psychological effect on the person there. So yes, there is something to be said about, as the thumbnail says, the therapeutic feng shui of a space. That is true. I'm not going to deny that. Okay. I'm still waiting for the explanations as to how any of this is a replacement for prisons, or how this is a replacement for the justice system at all. Because again, if you're just going to argue to me, some spaces are more comforting and calming than others, you're pushing in an open door. I'm not going to argue with that. A dank, wet prison cell is probably not nearly as fun as a comfy couch in a therapist's office. Sure. Beyond that, what more can you find out that you need taxpayer money for? Thank you, Johnny Hellcat. Well, it is the final frontier, after all. Yes. Star Trek is so far in the future and so advanced that it has solved all problems. And the undiscovered country, the future.
And what we wanted to do was to create an open access research tool that would share our results with a wide community of practitioners.
Just please don't tell me you took government money to come to the conclusion that some spaces and the design thereof are more comfortable and comforting than others. That's... oh boy. Thank you again, Xbob Hotep. This sounds like me writing a book report in high school on the symbolism of X book that I haven't read. Well, I mean, let's give it a shot here. Let's see what they have to say, what their grand research project informed them of.
And students as well, of course.
Of course.
And I don't have time to go into it in detail, but I will mention that the drawing that you're seeing on the screen right now, which is the work of our research assistant, Marcela Torres Milano.
Oh, she did that? What did you contribute?
Is in many ways a kind of summary of our findings in terms of what makes a successful restorative justice space. But
so far, barring some more information coming my way, this all sounds like a glorified interior design class that you took government money to create a picture.
Maybe we'll talk about that more in the chat.
You better talk about it more in your presentation, because that's the whole point of this, isn't it?
During the discussion. So a central aspect of restorative justice and transitional justice is truth-telling, witnessing, and listening. So a central part of our methodology was oral history and interviewing. And between, really over the last 2 years, the team has conducted interviews with 35 individuals who are involved with restorative justice and or transitional justice.
So you surveyed individuals, all 35, who are possessing of a vested interest in this subject. Did you interview anybody who had any skepticism about the subject, or on the opposite side, did you talk to anybody in the regular criminal justice system? What?
And sometimes those categories overlap.
Uh-huh.
And our interviewees so far have been alternative justice architects, caseworkers, advocates from Canada, Colombia, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand. Those are the main countries, although we do have interviews with people in other countries as well.
So you interviewed 35 true believers. Great.
And here I'll just show you, sorry, here we go. This is just a screenshot showing you a few of our interviews from American practitioners, and you're going to recognize maybe a familiar face in the top right-hand corner.
Uh-huh.
Tarek gave us an amazing interview last year. And I'm delighted to say that Barb Tavs is also going to be interviewed for this project. So,
What? Holly O'Hara, Precious Blood Ministry of Reconciliation. I'm sure it's completely benign. The name alone makes me like, what?
So there are a variety of perspectives that you can encounter through this section of the website, the interviews section. And we really hope that this variety will help the visitor to understand that the spaces of restorative and transitional justice are shaped by participants as well as by architects and designers.
The spaces in which people have difficult conversations are the result of people. The people that design them and the people that decorate them. Really? Okay.
However, it's very important to us to show how architecture and design, even in very modest projects, like zero budget projects, have a significant impact on how alternative justice takes place, how it is lived or experienced by the participant.
So you're going to provide us with an active example of a restorative justice session or instance or something that, a success story. Or at least, an amalgamated hypothetical. If you don't want to use people's names and protect their privacy, okay, I can see that. But you're going to give us something we can, sort of sink our teeth into, yes?
So to this end, we also have information on 35 case studies of purpose-built and adaptively reused spaces in which...
35? Huh. That's the exact same number of the people that you interviewed for this. They wouldn't all be showing off their personal pet projects or something, would they, individually?
Restorative justice and or transitional justice activities take place. And again, the case studies to date are primarily, but not exclusively, from Canada, Colombia, United States, Australia, and New Zealand. I did want to show you briefly what a case study might look like on the website, but unfortunately we weren't able to do sort of true screen sharing. So you'll have to trust me that there's extensive data for each of these websites. So not only what is it, where is it, but how is it being used, who designed it, what exactly is the nature of the alternative justice work that is taking place, and sort of what values or principles or politics are built into the design of the space, what challenges are...
Why don't you pick one of the 35 and profile it for us here? Why don't you pick your favorite and describe it, and let us know that it doesn't necessarily represent every other example, but here's one that you find particularly inspiring, something like that. But instead, you're just going to hand wave over it all. Okay.
Are being faced by the alternative justice practitioners in that space, and so forth. In the interest of time, though, I will just give you one case study that we do explore on the website.
Okay, all right. I take it back. My sarcasm nullified for the second.
And this is the Rangatahi court. This is an adapted youth court process in Aotearoa or New Zealand.
Youth court. So like juvenile court. Okay.
which uses existing architecture.
Oh, existing architecture. So it's repurposed space. The thing you said was such a detrimental idea in your very first example. Okay.
So this adapted youth court process is specifically for Māori or Indigenous youth.
Okay, so it is for a specific demographic. All right.
For first-time offenders under the age of 17.
First-time offenders under the age of 17. But, the more qualifications you put on this, the less that it sounds like something that could be implemented on a wide scale. But maybe that's just me.
And this is a group that is like at every age, in fact, in New Zealand, but disproportionately represented in the court system and in the prison system.
Disproportionately. Why is it disproportionately? Are they not committing the crimes that put them in the system in the first place? Or why is that See, that's the thing. Say something is disproportional. Well, is it disproportional to reality? What?
So several things distinguish this adapted process from the ordinary courts.
First off, that it's not in the criminal justice system. Second off, that's a diversionary program. Third off, that it's specific to a very specific demographic and age group and first-time offenders. It's very much different than everything else because it sounds like scared straight more than it sounds like an actual adjunct to the criminal justice system.
First, the Rangatahi court takes place on traditional tribal lands of different Māori nations.
Okay.
Second, the court takes place within the traditional ceremonial building of that nation.
Okay.
Or the wharenui, which is understood to be a site where the individual connects with both the land, so this sort of sacred land surrounding the wharenui, and with the ancestors who are represented within that space in different ways.
Okay, so you want, or you're at least ostensibly promoting, a culturally segregated justice system. Or ethnically segregated justice system. Like if you trace your lineage back to this people, then you go to this justice system. Do you have an example similar to, I don't know, pick any other ethnic demographic in New Zealand? Do they get their own special set-aside private justice system for their first offender youth?
So the young person who is facing this court is quite literally surrounded by their heritage and culture.
Yeah, are they? What? But simply on the basis of what? Their genetics? I don't know. My genetics would say that my heritage and culture should be like Scottish, German, and Belgian all put together. But if you put me into a Scottish court or a Belgian court or a German court, I would feel completely out of place, right? But, I guess it all depends on what we're talking about.
And because each wharenui is decorated with intricate symbolic carvings out of local materials, it's a very grounded and site-specific and community-specific process.
I don't know. That looks awfully intimidating. Maybe that's just me.
Finally, the court is presided over not only by settler judges and officials, but also by elders within the Māori nation in question.
Okay, so again, ethnically/culturally segregated justice systems. Okay.
So this presence of elders is extremely significant.
Well, you mean under 17 first-time offenders surrounded by people who are older than them? God, what are the odds?
It's a non-hierarchical seating arrangement.
A non-hierarchical seating arrangement? Are you kidding me? Did you look? Did I just watch let's look at the same picture? Hold on. Non-hierarchical. Okay, well, who's here at the back? I mean, are they standing in a big square? Are the people here in the suits and everything? Are you sure about that?
It's a very grounded and site-specific and community-specific process.
Yeah, I'm seeing
Finally,
that.
the court is presided over not only by settler judges and officials, but also by elders within the Māori nation in question.
Okay.
So this presence of elders is extremely significant. It's a non-hierarchical seating arrangement. And more importantly, the elders are part of every decision, including sentencing and follow-up. And most importantly, these elders make the link between the young person and, as I think this slide shows so beautifully, the invisible community of ancestors that the building houses and protects, and in fact represents for someone who can understand the visual and spatial language.
Oh, someone who can understand it, right? Because somebody who comes in there, if they can't understand the spatial language, then they don't. Okay. Do you have an example of a restorative justice space that is not ethnically segregated? I mean, I can't think of a better phrase for it. Ethnically or culturally segregated. Is there a restorative justice space for everyone? Or does it always have to be divvied up on the basis of one's presumed culture and background?
So I think this example helps us to understand how the built environment so deeply implicated in systems of power.
You didn't build that environment. You said it was previously established space. It wasn't built for this purpose. What?
In cultural and community traditions and in personal experience is really central to the idea of justice in this context.
Separate justice is what you're talking about. A separate justice. A justice for this demographic and a different justice for this demographic, rather than everybody under one community/nation being held to account under the same set of rules. You're divvying things up on the basis of ethnicity and race in your own example. Maybe that's not the case across the board, but this is your example.
So the last part of the website, which you could visit, but you would be frustrated, is our designs section. And you can see that this part of our website is under construction.
The designs portion of your website is under construction. That's great. Thank you. I clicked on the wrong thing, but I'll read it anyway. Anthem Ward. Again, I say hippie woohoo will solve everything. Kumbaya. They talk about circles, healing huts. Thank you, Zero Depressive. Is there a restorative justice space that offers trial by combat? One can only hope. Let's settle our differences. Justice at first blood or something. I don't know. I mean, who knows? I mean, if it's part of some specific culture, ethnicity, or whatever they've created a safe space for, maybe it is. Thank you, Bubba Hotep. Is she arguing for those judges that let someone off because they knew them? I don't know what she's arguing for. Her example is this space, right? Okay, the space is culturally specific, ethnically focused. The people inhabiting the space for the sake of the trial, because it's not the criminal justice system, it's something else, are of their own kind. I mean, the more that I say these things and re-describe what you just laid out there, the less attractive the idea is to me. To make justice a tribalistic system in any particular community. To say that, oh, well, you qualify for this kind of justice because you look this way or because of your bloodline or something. That seems like a giant leap backwards in society, in civilization, in equality, than it sounds like something that's actually beneficial. But then she hasn't actually told us what happens at these places or what the results of this process is or how it compares to, say, the restorative justice program down the street. So I don't know what we're talking about other than here's 4 walls and a ceiling in which to do a thing. Some are nicer than others. If you have a good decorator, the end. I don't know.
Now, this is a part of our process that I'm very excited about because it ties directly to some pedagogical activities that we've also incorporated into the project.
Okay.
So over the last semester, myself and Dr. Pecoraro have both been teaching courses using the material on this website.
I would hope you'd at least do that, given that you took federal money to make this happen.
In our respective institutions. So I've been teaching an architectural history course, and EPEC has been teaching a design studio. And our intention was that the projects that result from this kind of interaction between our two courses would also be featured on the site. So in fact, we only had our final critiques yesterday. But here you can see, this is just one example, architecture students Georgia Ballman and Brandon Nkumana presenting their project Sound and Space in a Land of 1,000 Hills.
Okay, I'm trying to get an idea of what I'm looking at. I hate to say it, part of me just thinks that this is a setup for a Warhammer 40K game. I'm sorry.
This is a community center project, a proposal for a community center project situated in Netenyo, Rwanda, which aims to be part of the transitional justice and peace building processes in this nation. So,
Rwanda. Okay, is this something that's actually going to happen, or what? Why Rwanda?
So it's a project that addresses memorialization, education, and economic development issues in Rwanda, and thus speaks to the different roles that architecture can play in the healing of communities in a post-conflict society.
Post-conflict. Okay, so you're talking about a place where, like, it's after a major war? Is that what you mean? Because I didn't know what they meant by post-conflict society. So, like, post-war Rwanda, that kind of thing? Or post-civil unrest Rwanda? I mean, this is her example. And I guess my next question is, how are the elements that she's brought up as being handled by this proposed center not being handled elsewhere by governmental agencies already? I mean, maybe they're not. I don't know. I know very little about the goings-on in modern-day Rwanda, so, but okay.
And this was meant to be a video, but I can't show you the video. But it's a very beautiful project that incorporates an extensive garden, and a garden that is specifically designed for listening to the experiences and memories and even the silences left in the aftermath of trauma.
Okay, so is this for truth and reconciliation in post-conflict Rwanda? Is there going to be, like, restorative justice taking place here on a... I understand it's just a project. It's just, as they said, Monty Python, the Holy Grail, it's only a model, but all the same, I'm not sure I understand what the ultimate purpose of this project is meant to do. Or at least describe to us, other than saying it's a calming garden, what about the design? If the design does this, what about the design promotes restorative justice? What elements of this design versus your average building promotes a calming or restorative space? And don't tell me it's just like pretty flowers and things, because you're talking about money for building materials, building buildings, you're talking about spaces, you're talking, physically, intentionally built spaces. What about that particular design lent itself to win the competition? Could you at least tell us that?
So with that, I'm going to thank you and hand things over, I believe, to Greg.
So it has a very nice garden proposal, but the actual design, you won't even take a minute to tell us what elements of the design, the actual architectural design, made this the winning entry. Okay.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Tarek. Thank you, Cynthia. patience, if you can also, here we go. Those are my slides.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to sort of continue the conversation with two examples from Colombia.
Question for any of my Canadian audience members that might be here. Is it normal to call it Colombia? Or, because I always hear it as British Columbia. Or is there a separate, this is me not knowing Canada, is there a separate area that's just called Columbia? Or is British being left off for some weird reason? I don't know. I honestly don't know.
These examples are taken from the website that Cynthia just talked about.
Okay.
And the reason why I'm focusing on Colombia as a country, it's where I've been based for the last 20 years.
Colombia as a country? Okay, again, this is me not knowing anything about Canadian geography or political boundaries or anything else. So, wait. He's talking about like Colombia? Sorry, I apologize. My brain, because when they're talking about Canada over and over again, I kept thinking that they're talking about, British Columbia. He's talking about Colombia, like South American Colombia. Okay, sorry guys. My brain is all over the place because every time they're talking about Canada, and most of their examples are Canada, I kept thinking British Columbia. There is another Columbia. I just didn't think of it in this context. But okay, he's talking about Colombia. My bad. Apologies.
And I think the two case studies that I'll be showing you are good examples of some of these things that Cynthia is talking about. Namely, what interests me is looking at the built environment and architecture, not only as a place for cultural practices to happen, like as a location, but also architecture as a reflection of certain cultural values and certain social hierarchies that exist in society.
Okay, so again, spaces that are culturally and ethnically segregated. Like, this space is not for you if you don't belong to this particular demographic. This is a justice for these people, not for these people. Okay.
So I'll go right into it. The first case study is a museum. It's an itinerant museum of memory and identity.
A museum. Okay.
In the Montes de Maria region of Colombia.
Again, apologies. I'm the idiot about Colombia. It's just that everybody seemed to be from Canada and talking about Canada, and my brain just, okay, I'll stop apologizing.
So this is on the coast of Colombia. Colombia is situated very close to the Caribbean Sea and also the Pacific on this side. Bogota, the capital, is near the center of the country, but now I'm referring to this coastal area in the north of the country, which was the site of several massacres during the Civil War. A peace agreement was signed in 2016, and many initiatives have come forth since then, proposing spaces for restorative and transitional justice.
Okay. See, every time I think about restorative justice, at least in the presentations I've seen, 9 times out of 10, it's about a replacement for, or at worst, a supplement to an existing criminal justice system, either as a diversionary thing or sometimes proposed as an entire replacement. A museum depicting the tragedies or the consequences of war, I mean, maybe that can contribute to some kind of cultural healing, if I'm being generous. I don't get the restorative justice part, right? How does that bring justice? How does that make someone to be held accountable for their actions? Whether I agree with the process and the results or not, that's the part that I'm confused about in this instance.
The two examples that I'll be mentioning today are examples of restorative justice practices, although they fit into this broader framework of transitional justice.
Okay, well, I'm obviously forgetting transitional justice and its definition, because if they're going to start conflating things together and saying they're all part of the same deal, I'm just going to, I guess, continually be confused.
after the signing of the peace accord in 2016.
Uh-huh.
So this first case study is the Itinerant Museum of Memory from the Montes de Maria. This is the founder of the museum, Soraya Bayuelo. And here I'm showing you this image to talk about Soraya, but also she was the winner of the Peace Award in 2003 in Colombia, and also a National Journalism Award in 2007.
Okay.
She's from the region and has been working in these processes since 1994. So one of the things that I'd like to talk about later on in the discussion is the process in terms of time duration of these examples.
Okay.
And the mochuelo, that name is a bird from that region. This is the bird, and it was chosen as a symbol for the construction of the itinerant museum. This is the blueprint of the museum. It's small, but at the same time, it contains many different modules.
It's larger on the inside. Okay, a museum. All right. Well, since this is why we're here, please tell me how this design in particular, the angles and so on and so forth, the Euclidean space in which the people are to peruse the history of conflict in Colombia, how this lends itself to restorative justice.
For people from the region and visitors to the region, to sort of explore the memory and identity of the people and the cultures there.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to show you a little bit some images here of the dimensions and the modules, the specific modules of the space. It's 18 meters long, 12 meters wide, 5 meters in height. It's you can disassemble it and reassemble it depending on the location where they want to present the information within the museum.
So it's a traveling exposition or exhibition, sorry, basically. Okay.
It travels mostly in the small towns of that region, in the coastal area of Colombia.
Uh-huh.
And it weighs 35 tons. So it's quite a task to disassemble it and reassemble it.
Are you fat shaming?
The first module is the welcome hall, which sort of gives some general information about the museum and about the region of Montes de Maria, which is a rural area of Colombia. It's worth noting. The second module is information about the territory and the memory in terms of the history of the conflict and the victims of the conflict, which is something we'll talk about during the discussion period.
Why? I mean, no offense, but we're not here to discuss the conflict in Colombia. We're here to discuss intentional physical spaces towards restorative justice. Unless this is just one giant advertisement for the things that you guys have built or been involved in. Because I thought we were going to discuss how it all works, or what you do, or what you need to add to it, or what elements either contribute or retract from a restorative space. I'm actually here to try and learn something, but not about the conflict in Colombia.
And then you have at the center of the structure, the tree of life, 700 leaves, paper leaves, with the names of the victims of the armed conflict.
I mean, I don't know anything about the armed conflict. There were only 700 victims. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to. Well, I guess by that statement, I minimize. When I think of a war, I think of a lot of people dying. But I mean, if only 700, or just 700. How did you pick the 700 names? If it was more than that, I don't know. I'm just, my brain goes all over the place.
And modules 3 and 4, they call them the wings of identity, which focuses on cultural practices, not from the past, but from the present, and the meaning that those cultural practices have for the communities of that region.
Don't cultural practices, aren't they informed by the past? I mean, okay.
And module 5, as you're exiting the structure, as you're leaving through the back, there's a patio theater, as they call it. And it's just an area where people could stop and reflect and talk about what they've seen, or just talk about anything that they would like to talk about. There's an area where there's traditional games from the region, because this space is open to both adults and children. And sometimes the children, they explore the spaces, but then they go to the back and start playing some traditional games.
Yeah, probably because the history lesson was kind of boring for a little kid.
Of that region. I thought that was an interesting addition to the design.
Why? Explain the design. Explain the philosophy behind the design. Okay? Like, why is it shaped the way it is? Why are there curves? Why is there a tree in the middle? Why is it designed the way that it is? How does this contribute or encourage restorative justice?
So the design process was led mostly by the Centro Ático of the Javeriana University in Bogota. You can see Soraya here to the right of the screen.
Right.
And it was funded by several different agencies, institutions, governmental institutions from Colombia, but also from abroad. Spain was involved, so was Norway and France. And basically, the focus of this space is the victims of the conflict.
Yes.
And in 2011, this is before the signing of the peace agreement, state institutions and civil society were meant to work together to achieve justice and the non-repetition of the violence. And so El Mochuelo is a good example of a citizen-led initiative. So it comes from the civil society. This was an idea from a citizen, in this case, Soraya. And it's more a bottoms-up initiative as opposed to a top-down initiative.
Yes, the opposition to a bottom-up initiative would be probably a top-down initiative, unless it's just erupting from the middle. I don't have anything to say to this. It's like, good, great. People trying to make their country better. I'm all for it. What does this have to do with the design elements of your museum? This is your example, and we're talking about design. Where's the design logic?
Which is the second example that I'm going to talk about. Okay. And that too is an interesting point of conversation that we could discuss.
I can't wait.
A little bit later.
Okay.
And so since it has been inaugurated, it has received more than 20,000 visitors to date.
Great.
So I'm going to right away talk about the second example. So
without giving us any information on the thinking behind the design of the first example. When we're here about design, and the whole point of this is to discuss what makes a restorative space versus a non-restorative space. Okay.
So that we could use them as a comparison.
Oh, okay.
This example is La Casita in Bogota, so the capital. Bogota is a city of more than 10 million inhabitants, a very urban context, in contrast to the rural context of the first case study.
Yes.
And La Casita is house in Spanish. It's this yellow house here in the center of Bogota.
I thought La Casa, or I guess you can have more than one way of saying a house, I guess. I don't know. I'm learning Spanish on the side, but obviously my vocabulary is not exactly expert level.
This is the interior space.
Would that be Portuguese or Spanish?
And it's a relatively small house, but they've installed some curtains to create sort of divisions within a larger space. And within those smaller spaces that are created by these curtains, certain pedagogical activities are taking place. And so this was designed by a design studio, an architectural design studio.
I would hope it was. Otherwise, this all seems kind of meaningless. Thank you, Zero Depressive. This feels like a pitch for the Gwyneth Paltrows of the world to donate money. I don't know what we're talking about now. I mean, if these are their pet projects or these are their favorite projects, great. I don't have it's like Here's an example of something that I'm excited about. Now, let me tell you how this design lends itself to XYZ. Like, why is that so difficult? Isn't that what we're here for? I mean, what was the title of this thing again? Restorative Justice and the Design of Intentional Physical Spaces. When do we get to the design process? What do you take into consideration when designing a restorative justice space? What are some of the, if not the rules, then the accepted philosophy? That's what I'm waiting for. But what do I know? Mr. E, Scarlett, if these people's position was that certain types of crime might be a good place for restorative justice, I could get on board with that. It's a terrible idea to assume all crime fits. Well, they haven't said that yet. I mean, and now Deanna Van Buren, in her original TED Talk, TEDx Talk, whichever it was, again, link to the my review of that is in the description. She did avoid getting too specific about what levels of crime deserve to be restorative justice versus otherwise. She brought up examples of people who had committed the most serious crimes and then just kind of hand waved away going any deeper into whether or not she would say that that kind of crime is a restorative justice territory versus a regular criminal justice territory. But either way, okay. Recognition, reparation, integration. So you have color-coded spaces in this space. Okay.
And they focus mostly on recognition, of self-recognition as a cultural recognition.
What does that mean?
Reparation and reintegration into society.
Wait, is this a space for actual criminals? What?
And this is to achieve restorative justice. They work with young offenders.
I'm seeing a pattern here. Okay, so you're taking kids. Are they first-time offenders by any chance?
In Bogota, not necessarily from Bogota. Sometimes they're young offenders who have come to Bogota from different regions of Colombia.
Okay.
And it's basically the purpose of the activities that take place within this space is the reintegration of the young offenders into society.
Reintegration. So are they coming from juvenile detention centers, and this is kind of like a halfway house / therapy session? I don't understand.
And so they designed 3 sort of boxes, if you will, to.
Please don't tell me you put the young offenders in the boxes.
To that serve as a tool to undergo these pedagogical activities.
Tell me how the boxes work. I'm very curious now.
The first one here, which has the symbol of a triangle, is the one for self-recognition, and it's where the young offenders could share stories, share narratives of their experiences. The second one.
How? What do they put them in the box? Do they record them into the box? Do they whisper them into the box? Like what?
Which has the symbol of this circle. It's to listen. It's to listen to different experiences and to different histories of conflict and histories of people who have survived the conflict and perpetrators of violence as well.
Well, wait. What? Wait. Okay, so you're bringing in juvenile offenders who I'm assuming have already been, since this is to be reintegrated into society, they've already been convicted of something and spent some time somewhere. And again, I have nothing else to base it on but what he said, so if I'm off base, I think it's an honest mistake. So you're taking juvenile offenders who've already been detained for some period of time, who've already been, I'm assuming, convicted of or held accountable for some crime committed, and you're bringing them to this place so they can talk about their experiences of committing crimes and listen to the experiences of others. Okay, well, talking to other kids who have committed crimes or been through the system, I guess there can be some benefit of that, but conflict? They are the conflict. If they're juvenile offenders, presumably there wasn't a conflict until they decided to do something illegal. Okay, and the next box of magic.
And then the last one, which has the symbol of a square, is for projecting. Not only projecting these narratives that have been shared, but also projecting proposals for the future, ideas about the future of these young offenders.
Yeah, here's an idea. Don't commit crimes. Right? Like Uncle Avi, don't go to England.
So this is part of the reintegration.
No, sorry, Cousin Avi. I think it was Cousin Avi.
Into society for restorative justice.
How does what do the boxes do? What do they do with the boxes? I mean, do they put their ear up to the box and like another kid stands at the other side of the box and they just kind of like whisper their deep dark secrets into the box? And come on, guys.
And so the questions that come to mind, at least for me, and I would like to propose here for the sake of discussion, on what principles and values are these examples of justice architecture based?
Okay, I think that's what I'm looking for. Although I'm honestly looking for specific rules of design, more or less, but maybe this is on our way to that.
So as I said at the beginning, it's not just a location for cultural practices to take place. These two locations are also a reflection of cultural values.
Okay.
I'm going to go back to this one in Montes de Maria.
Why?
And you can talk about different values that are reflected here. I think first and foremost, it's respect for the victims, and this both at the civil society level, but also at the state level, this has been part of the discourse of the last few years in Colombia, a respect for the victims.
Okay, I'm still waiting. How does that lend itself to design decisions? What about the museum's design, by your perspective, embodies respect for the victims? Not the material displayed. That's one thing. I'm talking about the design.
And to achieve justice, not only justice, but also to achieve a non-repetition.
How? In your perfect world, how does that museum achieve justice and achieve non-repetition?
So a peaceful coexistence between different actors in society. But there's also the question of the value of access. So who has access to these spaces?
I guess whichever town you've disassembled the thing and built it into. You choose, or the people in charge of it choose where it goes. And it's got a front door and it's got a back door.
And you could sort of compare these two examples, the one here in the Montes de Maria region.
Yeah.
Who has access to these spaces?
Well, more people conceivably because it's mobile, and fewer people in the second example because it's stationary. Can I get a degree in restorative design now?
And also, who has access in terms of participating in the design process of these spaces?
Well, that's a whole separate thing. Okay, attendees to the space is different than the people who designed it originally.
And here I do see some differences.
You think?
I think they're both pedagogical oriented in their approach, but you can see some differences in terms of how people use these spaces.
Yeah, because one space looks like an actual informative museum of a kind. I mean, I can see its utility. The second space has magic boxes. I mean,
and how much access they have in terms of the information presented and the design process itself.
Yeah, that's what I want to hear about, the design process. Why is this so difficult to arrive at?
Another point that they have in common is this using shared cultural memory as a starting point for building a better society.
Shared cultural memory. All right, can you have an example of that?
And I know that the Zare Institute focuses a lot on this idea of restorative justice is when you ask yourself, what are we restoring when we talk about restorative justice?
Yeah, that is a good question. What are you restoring when you talk about restorative justice?
One of the things that the Zer Institute talks about quite frequently is this idea of restoring trust between the different actors in society.
Yeah, well, again, as I brought up a multitude of times in previous restorative justice presentations, if we're talking about crime, how do you restore the trust between the rapist and their victim? How do you restore the trust between the murderer and the survivors? How does restorative justice meant to do that? And if you do not mean for it to apply to crimes of that severity, you really have to draw some very clear lines as to when these things apply. Very few do when I watch these things. There are a couple. There have been a couple who've been like, yeah, this only applies to this level of crime. It's been very rare when that's come up.
So both of these use culture as a starting point and a shared cultural memory as a starting point.
Yes, I'm seeing the cultural and ethnic segregation of justice systems here. Yes, that's very, very clear.
For building or rebuilding trust in society. And so I think this is an interesting part of the conversation as well.
Can you give us an example of where trust was restored using one or both of these examples? Or these institutions, these buildings, whatever. Do you have a success story? Can you draw a line from the beginning to the end of the process for any particular individual or conflict? Something.
One of the things as a researcher that I'm very much interested in, and I'll end on this point, is how these cultural practices and these examples of architecture are embedded within a certain, cultural framework, if you will. And this embeddedness is important to think about when we design these spaces.
Okay, well, in the first instance, as far as I can tell, the museum was designed wholly of itself, like it's an original construction, right? In the second instance, you rented out office space and then had to do some interior designing. All right, so what's cultural about that office space versus a from the ground up designed building? How do those two dynamics work in this process? What design rules or philosophies are guiding both projects? Because there's got to be some kind of connective tissue to this whole idea, regardless of where you're setting one of these things up, right?
And think about who is using these spaces, but also, how are they participating in the design process as well?
What? Okay. How is some kid who hasn't even shown up to your restorative justice boxery over here, how are they going to participate in the design process when they have no involvement in the design process? What are you talking about?
Because we often talk about bottoms-up initiatives versus top-down initiatives.
Yeah.
And I think that beyond that conversation, which is an important conversation to have, how do these structures enable social practices to flourish?
Yeah. Can you give us an example?
And so even if it's bottoms down, sometimes it does enable those types of practices to happen, this flourishing, this building of trust to happen.
How? Good gravy. Do you have an example of a success story? Can you walk us through the process of the magical box kingdom? Like how does a juvenile offender go from box A to box B to box C and come out more trustworthy? Anything?
And when they're bottom up as well. So I think that when we talk about the built environment and these spaces of restorative justice, how do they enable these social practices to flourish?
That's what I want to know.
And not exist as spaces sort of isolated from the embeddedness of cultural practices. But
all it is isolated. The lady's other example was isolated. It was for a very specific ethnic demographic. It was for a very specific age group, a very specific, frequency of offender. It's all about isolating people on the basis of things that make them just what they are, not who they are, and making separate systems of justice on the basis of culture. Segregated justice doesn't sound like justice to me, but I don't know what you're talking about because you won't tell us how this is supposed to work or what results come out of it.
Like this is where we want this to happen. In contrast to, we have to build these spaces in many different areas of a city or of a rural community so that there's an embeddedness to these practices.
What practices?
Thank you very much, and I hope you will find this useful in our discussion to come.
No. Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you. Thank you to Zaire Institute and Dr. Tariq Maserani for the invitation. I'm really honored to take part in this discussion. I'd like to start by land acknowledgement, a very short one. I am connecting from Yale University, which is built on unceded land. We're on the traditional territory of the Kanyankehaka Nation, one of the 5 founding nations of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I'm going to first...
Why are you there? Why are you occupying that space? What justification do you have for taking up space on somebody else's property? That's what I always, just as an aside, whenever I hear one of these land acknowledgements or something else, oftentimes it's far more in depth and it's far more confession oriented, or very guilt ridden. And my question always is, well, if you're declaring that you are currently inhabiting someone else's property, why are you there? Why do you feel comfortable where you're at? It's like, oh, well, it's like me walking onto somebody else's property. Like I go into somebody else's yard and I say, I want you to know that I'm standing in the yard of Joseph Smith of Main Street. And just like keep standing there. That's kind of what I imagine when these things happen.
Offer a description of spatial justice. My chair is...
Spatial justice? Oh, I did 2 videos on that like 3 years ago. Oh, tell me more about spatial justice. And boy, my pause game, that's exorcist level face right there.
In architectures of spatial justice. And Dr. Maserani has asked me to explain how it's related to restorative justice. So I'm going to first offer a description of spatial justice as a concept.
I haven't even gotten through transitional justice. I'm not even sure what you guys mean by restorative justice by these examples. And now we're going into spatial justice. Just call it the Justice League. I'm spatial justice. I'm restorative justice. I'm transitional justice. I'm, hamburger justice.
Then I will offer an overview, very short overview of my different research projects that fall under the umbrella of my chair.
All right, just as a note, I got about 10 minutes left in my usual hour and a half running time for the broadcast. I'm going to have to do a part 2. I want to get to Deanna Van Buren. I want to at least get some of what she has to say. And she doesn't show up until later on, so... Oh, boy.
Which I hope will concretize a little bit how the concept relates to architecture and the built environment. And finally, I will discuss the relationship between spatial justice, social justice, and restorative justice.
Oh, my gosh.
Which I hope will initiate some debate.
Okay.
So the concept of spatial justice is usually traced to the writings of Henri Lefebvre on the right to the city, which dates from 1968. And neo-Marxist urban geographers since Lefebvre, such as David Harvey, Don Mitchell, and Ed Soja have...
Did you say neo-Marxist? I'm sorry, her accent is very thick.
connected in their writings, social justice and the space, and they refer to the space of the city, not specifically necessarily the built environment as we understand at the scale.
So they refer to something that you're not actually talking about in this presentation, but you're referring to them anyway. Okay.
Conventionally, as we think as architects. So it was Ed Soja who coined the term in his book, Seeking Spatial Justice, which was published in 2012, but urban geographers have been making this connection between social justice and the city for a long time, since the 60s at least.
Oh, you mean like different parts of town had different qualities of life, that kind of thing? Yeah, what a new concept.
So while none of these theories writes on architecture as a discipline, the centrality of space and spatial relations in their theorizations make them relevant for the study of the built environment. So the first objective of my scholarly investigations is to contribute to the broader goals of understanding how fundamental issues in democracy are embedded in space in the design of our cities, streets, public spaces, housing, and schools.
Democracy embedded in the design. Okay.
The accessibility of the built environment, and not only the built environment, but the design discipline is vital to building democratic societies as articulated in past years' social movements. And by accessibility, I'm not referring to physical accessibility, of course, though as it may, it is very, physical accessibility is very, very important, but I'm really referring to social political accessibility as well.
Let me ask you something, and I know I'm asking rhetorically. If I take a building built in a democratic society and I just teleport it into the downtown communist China, and somebody from, who lives in China enters this building, are they suddenly democratized? I mean, what magic is embedded in the various angles of that building that increase democracy versus any other system of government around which that building would, inhabit? I'm losing my own words here because I've listened to so much nonsense. What are you talking about? Democratic design. Are you talking about like small d democratic? Or what do you... Okay, you know what? I'm going to stop here. I'm just going to stop here. 3228 for my own reference. I don't know if I have anything else to say that I haven't already basically said during the course of this. I have not gotten anything out of this that I thought I would, or that was seemingly promised at the jump. But I'll take a minute or two here to see if you guys have anything you'd like to add or have added, since I stopped putting up comments randomly. Enigma 500, that is nice. Restorative justice for tribes living off far-off countries doesn't seem like having anything to do with restorative U.S. justice. Well, I mean, I didn't necessarily imagine it would be just U.S. justice, but I mean, Deanna Van Buren was talking specifically on her TEDx talk or TED talk about putting in restorative justice centers, I believe, in Oakland, California. And most of the presentations I've looked at have dealt with restorative justice in America, but oftentimes in Canada as well. So, the concept should remain relatively the same regardless of what part of the world it's taking place in. But when it comes to the actual design decisions of a space, that's what I'm waiting to hear about. I'm waiting to hear what are the rules, or what is the philosophy behind that isn't just, hey, imagine a therapist's office where it's calm, comfortable, and quiet. Because, like I say, you can imagine a comfortable space versus an uncomfortable space pretty quick, and it doesn't require an architectural degree to imagine it. But, the entire panel of people have been taking government money and been dedicating their entire careers to this stuff. So I was hoping for something more Substantive, irate bear. Let's see. Bridget. Is spatial justice for victims of space crime? Okay, let me give you, and this is an actual example from one of my previous videos on this. And I think if you search my channel for spatial justice, you'll come up with a couple of results. There was a park this guy was talking about, and he talked about how there were some flowers growing there that looked very pretty. However, those flowers put out a decent amount of pollen. So consequently, people who had allergies, well, they couldn't really enjoy the park because of those flowers. And so they had to take out those flowers to make sure everybody could enjoy the park. Now, that seems reasonable, right? But that is an example of spatial justice. It gets more granular than that, though, and gets more ridiculous as it goes on. But that was one of their examples of what spatial justice is. I can enter the space. The space is open to everyone or as many people as possible. Accessibility, etc. Okay. Sounds fine. Within reason, obviously. Or you can't account for everything, but yeah. It gets weirder than that, but I'll recommend you go watch one of my videos or just look up a video on spatial justice. And again, from Bridget, where do they draw the line for those eligible for restorative justice? Those who commit hate crimes, repeat offenders, those who do unspeakable acts to children. Again, except in a very, very, very few number of cases, which I've watched. I'm not saying that there aren't theories out there or proposals otherwise. I haven't seen them or read them all. But in the many videos and presentations I've watched, I think maybe only twice out of the several, I think dozen at this point, or a couple of dozen, has the subject of a line being drawn as to where this applies was ever either mentioned or alluded to. Oftentimes, it is either not even brought up, or if it is brought up, like in the case of Deanna Van Buren, she talks about working with an inmate who was in prison for murder. And she talks about how she went through this, design process with him in this workshop or whatever. But then she never goes beyond that to ask the question of herself or her own theory. Well, would you apply this to that same guy? Right? I mean, if he had just killed somebody yesterday, is this what you would do insofar as seeking restoration with this individual? How would that work? She never goes there. She brings it up, doesn't go there. Oftentimes, a lot of speakers won't even bring up the most serious crimes. They'll just talk about restorative justice as, healing the community and bringing the victim and the perpetrator together, and not get more specific than that, which is a problem. Ryan R. just sent a pop-up space to Buffalo, New York to help the guy who shot up the grocery store. Problem solved, embeddedness achieved. Yeah, I would love to ask some of the experts in restorative justice, okay, given the event that just took place in Buffalo, New York, how would restorative justice apply to this person? If in your dream of dreams, prisons were abolished and police were reduced down to nothing more than, traffic cops or something, what would you do with this person? What would you do with the next Bernie Madoff? What would you do with the next Ted Bundy? What do you do with someone who does something of the most egregious nature and damages many, many people's lives, or even just one life in the way that those guys did? What do you do with this person in the restorative justice process? Put them back into the community, make them promise they'll never do it again? Because that's a lot of what some of the restorative justice proposals sound like. So, yeah. And Ken Lee says it's victim abuse. Well, this is the thing. This is the thing that very few of them ever bring up, because the dynamic of restorative justice, at least the ones that I've heard about more often than not, requires the participation of the victim, or of the person harmed. And if they do not wish to participate, what do you do then? That's why we have the state in place of the victim as a buffer and as a representative of the community, the society, the laws, right? I mean, now, oftentimes, if the accuser isn't willing to participate, sometimes you don't have a crime. But that's just it, right? There's a shield between the victim having to face the person who harmed them when you have the state involved as the buffer. If the victim does not want to participate in restorative justice, how do you restore anything? Whole bunch of problems, whole bunch of questions, rarely ever answered, and certainly in this instance, I don't have my answers yet, but I will pursue them again next Sunday. Oh, wait, no, I take it back. I just remembered. I am out of town next Sunday. Uh-oh. I might have to do a supplementary stream sometime during the middle of the week to catch up on this. Okay, so yeah, I just forgot. I'm out of town with Sister Scribe as we go visit our parents. So yeah, I won't be here next Sunday morning. I'll be here Sunday, later on in Sunday, but not Sunday morning. I don't know. If I did a later in the day Sunday stream, would you all hate me? Let me know in the comments below. Let me know on Twitter. There's my little Twitter handle there at the bottom of the screen if you don't already know it. Either way, everyone, if you'd like to hear more from me by any chance, well, I have a whole channel full of this kind of stuff. And search for Restorative Justice, and you'll find all kinds of things like that. You can see the original Deanna Van Buren TED Talk, TEDx Talk, linked in the description below. And you'll see me again, for sure, Thursday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern for another edition of TEDXcellence, where I'll look at another off-brand TED Talk for my education and information. I call it information. With that, everybody, I hope you all have a good rest of your Sunday. Moderators, thank you for keeping an eye on things. Even though everyone here is so well behaved, you have very little to do. Everybody who donated, either to myself or, and I think I forgot to say it again, at the top of the chat box, we have GoFundMes there for Shady Grin, Angry Illinoisian, and his kitten, friends of the channel. They and their loved ones and friends could certainly use your help if you have a couple of bucks to spare, so please take a look at that. On your way towards the gift shop, there is no gift shop, unless it's the merch store. I do have a merch store. There's a link to that below. I don't really advertise it that much. It's not really forefront on my mind. Either way, everyone, thank you for joining me. I hope you learned something or learned what we want to learn out of this from these professionals, from these academics, from people who took government money to put together a website that they haven't actually finished yet. Have a good rest of your Sunday, everybody. Have a good rest of your weekend. I hope you're all safe and well. If you're not well, please get well soon, and I will see you on the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.